we are here to talk about the best of the best, my top 10 books of the year. And this was, I would say this year definitely had some big highlights in it, which is what this video is going to celebrate. As a whole, this felt like a more sort of like meh reading year. Like it didn't feel like I had as many highs and lows as normal. But I do have, like when it was coming time to make the actual top 10, the top 6 are easy because those were my 6 5-stars of the year. But then wading my way through all of the 4.5s to figure out what was gonna be, the last 4 was really hard. So I usually do, I think, some stats here, but I don't remember which ones I normally do, and I haven't calculated them yet. So I'm gonna pause here for some stats that we both will find out together in just a second. Well, thank you, Past Mara, for completely punting and forcing me to figure out what we're doing for stats this year. Really appreciate that. So we're doing things a little differently because I am building my stats in Canva now instead of in Google Sheets. So it's not going to be exactly the same as last time, but I think that's okay. You guys are very forgiving. I am much more, worried about that than you guys ever are. So in terms of stats, what you're looking at now are the stats, the kind of high level stats for all of the eligible books for this best of list. Like I mentioned in every video, it runs from the beginning of December of the previous year through November of the current year. And this time I did make an exception and add one book in because it just felt like the right thing to do. So 268 books were eligible. Of those 268 books, I gave 24 4.5 stars and I gave 6 books 5 stars, which equals out to roughly 8.5% of the books I read got a 4.5 and roughly 2.5% got a 5. So I feel like that makes sense. This is like my top 90% or my top 10-ish percent, my top 11%, which is an A in the US school system. So these really are my A-level books. So that feels right. Once again, in the eligible books, mystery was my biggest genre read. That has been true. Well, it kind of vacillates between mystery, speculative romance. They kind of go back and forth in the last few years. But anyway, just to give you guys a sense overall of what this pool of books looked like, these are the overall stats. And then I thought it might be cool to look at some of the key kind of like demographic-ish metrics that I track for books and look how my top 10% compared to the overall. So a couple of notable things. Most of this is roughly the same. There's 3 that I think are different in a significant way. One is way more not like me in my 4.5 and 5-star reads, which I think is notable and probably in some part, like, you know, reading outside of my lived experience can be a very enlightening one and a very rich and rewarding one. So I guess that makes sense. Less books are in a series in my top 10%. My top 10%, it's only, I think, 40%. So yeah, it's 60% in my overall and 40% in my top books. So more standalones in my top. And then about half and half of my top reads were repeat authors versus half were new authors to me. And that is more new authors in my top reads than in the overall reading population. So anyway, I just thought that these were some kind of interesting comparisons of how this top percentage shakes out in comparison to my overall reading for the year. So you'll get a full stats video for all of 2023 at the beginning of the new year, but these are just for the books that were eligible for my best of 2023 list. Back to Past Mara. I hope you're proud of yourself for completely failing to do your job. So there you go, there are some stats. Okay, so what I've done the last couple of years, which I think works well, is rather than talk to you about what I like, the book itself, like talking about the book, I'm gonna talk about more why it made the list and why it's in the position it's in. If you wanna see more thoughts about the books themselves, I do all of these different kind of sub lists that are for different genres. So mystery, sci-fi fantasy, etc. So if you wanna see more thoughts about any of these books, go check that out. But we'll just talk about placement here. So number 10, technically this is a top 11. Actually, it's even more than that. You'll see, but this was the slot I couldn't decide. I was between The Clockwork Boys and A House with Good Bones. Both of these are by T. Kingfisher. I definitely felt like there needed to be a T. Kingfisher in the top 10. If I had to say push come to shove, probably I'd pick A House with Good Bones, only because I think The Clockwork Boys really is just the first half. Really, this is a duology that is basically one book, which is Clockwork Boys and The Wonder Engine. So, okay, you know what? I will keep it to a top 10. But I had to include T. Kingfisher because this was the year I decided that T. Kingfisher really is an all-time favorite author, because she just consistently is giving me what I want. Her humor works for me. Her book length works for me. The themes she explores. She does a lot of fairy tale retellings. She does horror, fantasy, and kind of romance, I guess. She also writes under Ursula Vernon, which is a children's, or like a middle grade, I think, author, middle grade stuff that she writes under that name, but I've not read any of that yet. But A House with Good Bones is just, I love the themes. The humor really works for me. It's like a gothy house, so the tropes are working. And yeah, I really love T. Kingfisher, and she's become an author whose backlist I'm excited to read and whose new books I'm always excited to anticipate. Number 9, I put this in the top 10 because I decided this had to make the list just for like sheer delight of being surprised at how much I loved this. And that is the 7 Brides for 7 Alien Brothers series from Honey Phillips. You know, Artek or Frantor are probably my 2 favorites in that series. But I wasn't expecting to love this, and I did. And it's exactly what I like from sci-fi romance. And I had to include it in the top 10 because I don't know. This year was a weird year for me with romance. I haven't filmed it yet, but I'm sure you will see that when I talk about my romance list. It was a weird year. It was a lot of me sort of just like going to some comfort reads or rereading things. I don't know. But this was one of the things that I read that was new that felt like, oh, I was expecting to like this, but I love this. And it was just, you know, nice to be surprised that way. Another author who surprised me, or another book that surprised me, was Lone Women. I originally gave this 4 stars when I first read it because I do have some critiques about it, but I put it at number 8 because it was my slow burn. It started as a 4, and the more I talked about it and the more I thought about it, the more I realized it had to be a 4.5. And so it is just like kind of slowly grown in my estimation over the year, which I actually find is kind of unusual. Often, the longer I get away from a book, the less I remember about it. I read a lot, so there's also just, you know, a lot of books in between me and when I read any given book. So I feel like it's more often that I like a book less as time goes on. This is one I liked more, and I'm so excited to read more from this author. This encapsulates a lot of what I like in horror in terms of its theming, its inventiveness, and its setting, characters. Like, it all really worked for me. So yeah, this one is number 8 because of the slow burn of my enjoyment of it. But my top 4.5 star for the year, I'm gonna have to give to The Decagon House Murders by Yukito Ayatsuji. This book is just such a love letter to those of us who love Golden Age of detective mysteries and people who love an isolated closed circle mystery thriller trope, which is my all-time favorite. This also represents to me my overall project of trying Japanese mysteries. It was sort of a tradition or like a regional subgenre that I hadn't really explored much before now, and I really enjoyed the process of doing that, as well as getting a bunch of new books for my TBR, which I definitely have. So this was an enjoyable project, and this book in particular just felt like a love letter to what I like best in mystery. So I felt like it had to be at the top of the 4.5s this year. Okay, now we're into 5-star. So 4.5 for me is a best of the year. A 5-star is an all-time favorite. So all 6 of these books are all-time favorites. So just keep that in mind when I'm talking about them, because they're all some of my favorite books I've ever read. But if I force myself to rank them, which is the whole torturous fun of this process, this is my ranking. Number 6, just because I do in my mind have a few critiques of this, but a common theme you will see in these top ones is, did all of them make me cry? Every single one of these every single one of these top 6 books made me cry. I just realized, for different reasons. So this one, I have some critiques of it, and that's why it's at number 6. But The Last Quintista by Donna Barbara Iguera is a middle grade sci-fi book that will break you in the best way possible. I love this as a story for young people, and I just think that this is really inventive, accessible for middle grade readers, but really a great read for adults too. So this was this is the only non-adult book on this list. It's definitely my favorite middle grade YA children's book that I read this year. This is so good, and I think you should read it if you're okay having your heart destroyed. And who isn't, right? Okay, and then number 5, I'm going to put the entire trilogy, the last trilogy of The Realm of the Elderlings, which is Fitz and the Fool. My favorite of the 3 is Fool's Assassin. The reason I put this here is mostly just by default, because I couldn't not put the remaining 4 where they are, but I loved this as the ending to The Realm of the Elderlings. That is one of my favorite series of all time. I love that as a reading project. Me and Leanna from Leanna's Library have been doing this for years at this point, and I loved buddy reading with her. I loved getting to be a better chunky fantasy reader by doing this. Like, I think I can get through them quicker than I used to be able to. And I think this book in particular, the reason I love it is just, it introduces a really significant new character and makes them really compelling. I think you learn new things about our existing characters, particularly Molly, in a way that I loved. And there's this sort of like mythic quality to this particular book that I really enjoyed. And it sets off, I would say that this final trilogy is probably the best plot of any of the sub-series. You definitely can't just read it as a standalone, or at least I would not encourage you to do that. But it works really well in the plot that it has going. I think it's a really, propulsive, something that you want to keep going in. We read these really quickly. Leanna and I did. We increased our schedule because neither of us could wait. So you want to keep going, and you also are getting all of this resolution to all of these other books. So anyway, I'm gushing, but this entire trilogy is amazing, and this was amazing. I loved it. So number 4 is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis. This is a book that I had read excerpts of over the years, but I had never sat down to actually read it. But the current situation in Israel and Palestine is, obviously very top of mind for me if you follow me on any of my socials, and that has been, a very significant part of my year. In the back half of the year is learning more about that, reading a lot about it, watching a lot of things. So it felt, in terms of my selfish experience, it felt like it needed to be this high, but also just, I really love this in terms of its form, because it's both speeches and interviews, which I think is that's not necessarily what you always get in nonfiction, where it's not, they're not always popular books that are kind of like that. But I also Angela Davis is such a brilliant mind, and I think especially targeted towards American audiences, I think she really connects the dots between the Palestinian struggle, the South African apartheid struggle, Black liberation movement, and Black Lives Matter, as well as prison reform. So I just think it's a piece of philosophy, really, but it's very accessible and very digestible, and where I would recommend Americans. It's targeted at an American audience, and I would really recommend it to basically everyone. So that's number 4. And then number 3, so in my sci-fi fantasy video, in that list, I put Fool's Assassin as my top 1 there, because I did think of it really with its trilogy. But in this top 10 book list, I decided to give the edge to Mammoths at the Gate, because if I'm thinking about a single book, this I preferred to any of those three in the Robin Hobb series. Just because I love novellas. I love novellas that are executed at a really high level. And this Singing Hills cycle from Niveau, I think, are just wonderfully entertaining novellas that all of them are different, but they have such a consistent through line in terms of, well, Cleric Chi is always our recurring character, but just they're all about storytelling. The world feels like it's always growing, but in ways that make sense. And this, you will see these top three. I picked these as the top three because all of them are really dealing with loss and grief, or dealing with sort of like existentialism or the passage of time or the reality that, you know, we're all in a one-way ticket out of here eventually. So this one is really dealing with the loss of a mentor in a way that I thought was beautiful and made me cry. I also read this around Father's Day, and I've lost my own father, so I was kind of connecting with that. And this is my favorite in the series so far, and I really connected with this one. So that is why it is number 3. Number 2 and 1 are not a surprise if you've seen my mystery video, because I told you there that this was going to be the ordering. But number 2 is Wrong Place, Wrong Time. This one I'm putting here just because, I don't know, it really could be in some ways a toss-up between this and number 1, but this feels like I don't like it quite as much as number 1. Probably because it's a standalone versus the other one is a series. There's like a character investment. But again, this is a lot about the passage of time, how like it's a lot about nostalgia, or like how you can't appreciate moments in the moment sometimes, and you have to let time pass to appreciate them. But it does all of that while also being a very entertaining mystery thriller. So yeah, I loved this, and really, I almost love it more than number 1, but I just don't, because I'm not as connected to the characters, if I'm being honest. Number 1 is The Last Devil to Die. And this is number 4 in a series that is so character driven, very funny, very entertaining mysteries, and also incredibly poignant because our core cast are people in their 70s. And so they are in their last phase of life, and they are, you know, trying to get as much out of life while they still have it. And it's so funny and so touching, and Bogdan is hot, and I love this. And I loved the experience of binging this series to get up to this 4th one, because I read this for the Goodreads Choice Award video I did. So this was the one that was nominated, so I had to read the previous 2 that I hadn't read yet. And I liked the first one, but number 2, The Man Who Died Twice, would have been on this list on its own if I hadn't read this, because I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. Bullet That Missed is also super good, really entertaining, 4 stars. This is 5 stars. And even though technically I should not be including it in this year's list because I read it at the beginning of December, it feels like it belongs on this year's list, not next year's list. So we're just gonna go ahead and do it now. But I'm obsessed. I love this so much. And it had to be number 1 this year. And I cannot wait for the next one. I can't believe he's gonna make me wait. Now that I'm caught up, I'm gonna have to wait for a new one because he's writing something else this coming year. And we're gonna have, anyway. I wept in this book, and honestly, how dare he make me cry like that and then force me to wait for more. So rude, Richard Osman. Anyway, those are my top books of 2023. These are my favorite things I read this year. Yeah, I think, like I said, it was kind of a mixed year overall, but I had some great reads, as you can tell. So I was excited to tell you about them. So let me know what you thought of any of these books, or let me know what the best book you've read in 2023 is in the comments below. And I think that will do it for me. And that will do it for this portion of Lists Like Whoa. The Listapalooza has concluded, though I also have some beginning of the year videos I always do with stats and superlatives and talking about my plans for the year. So look forward to that. But for now, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, and I think that will do it. I hope you're having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!